A woman raised three daughters who weren't her own for 15 years and found out on a Sunday afternoon through a laptop she forgot to close that she'd never been their mother. She'd been their landlord. My name is Carol Hensley. I'm 62 years old, and for a long time I thought I understood exactly what my place was in this family. I was wrong. And I found that out sitting 3 feet away from a screen, reading words my stepdaughters never meant for me to see, while a doctor's voicemail about my declining kidney function sat unheard in my phone because I hadn't had the stomach to listen to it yet. Let me start from the beginning. I run a small bakery out on Route 9 in Millbrook, New Hampshire, Hensley's Hearth. If you've ever passed through and smelled the cinnamon rolls from the parking lot, that's mine. 31 years I've been proofing dough before sunrise. I never had children of my own. There was an illness in my 20s that took that possibility off the table permanently, and I made my peace with it the way you make peace with weather. Then I met Walt. Walt Pearson was a widower with three girls. Renee was 12, Danielle was 10, and little Ashley was only 7 when I came into the picture. Walt's first wife had passed from an aneurysm, sudden, no warning, and that man was drowning trying to raise 3 girls and run his auto shop at the same time. I didn't marry into a family. I married into a rescue mission, and I loved every exhausting minute of it. 15 years I've been their stepmother. 14 years since I legally adopted all 3 of them. Actually, since Walt insisted on it, 2 years in wanted it official, wanted them to have my name too, if they wanted it to mean something on paper, not just in practice. I braided hair for school pictures. I sat through 11 years combined of dance recitals, 3 different disastrous perms, one truly memorable prom dress crisis at 11 o'clock at night. When Renee wanted to go to culinary school, I didn't just support her, I paid for it. $18,000 out of my own savings, no loan, no strings, because I remembered what it felt like to want something nobody could afford to give you. When Danielle needed a car for her nursing rotations, I co-signed the loan. My name is still on that title. And Ashley Sweet, restless Ashley, 24 now and still finding her footing, lives in the little carriage house behind our property, pays me $300 a month when market rent out here is closer to $1,500. I told myself I was giving her room to grow into herself. Turns out I was just giving her a very comfortable place to stay lost. Welcome to the channel, by the way. If you're new here, settle in because this one's going to take you somewhere you don't expect. Go ahead and hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from tonight. I read every one of them. I promise you that. Here's something you should know about me before we go further. I am not a woman who cries easily. 31 years on my feet at 4 in the morning, hands in dough, running a business through 2 recessions and a pandemic that nearly took the whole building down with it. That kind of life hardens the soft parts of you. But I had one thing, one small extravagance that was purely, selfishly mine. A 1,962 Airstream Bambi trailer, the little egg-shaped kind, aluminum shell gone dull with age when I found it at an estate sale outside of Concord 19 years ago. Rust through the floor panels. Mice had gotten into the insulation. Everyone told me to walk away from it. I didn't walk away. Took me 12 years, working on it in stolen hours after the bakery closed, to bring that thing back to life. New floor, rewired the whole electrical system myself after taking a night class on it, upholstered the little dinette benches in a cream vinyl I had custom cut. There's a man 2 towns over, runs a classic camper restoration business, name of Gordon Teal, and every single year at the Lakes Region Vintage Rally, Gordon corners me by that Airstream and makes the same offer. $68,000 Carol cash today. And every year I laugh and tell him the same thing. Not for sale, Gordon. That trailer's mine until they put me in the ground. I meant it every time I said it. I remember one afternoon, maybe 3 years back, before any of what I'm about to tell you happened. I was out by the trailer just wiping down the aluminum, not really cleaning anything, just touching it the way you touch something you love. Renee came around the side of the garage carrying a folder of paperwork, practically glowing. She'd just gotten word she was being offered a sous chef position at a restaurant 2 hours south, her first real break. She spread the acceptance letter out on the little folding table beside the Airstream. Look at this, Mom. She'd started calling me Mom around year 4, and it still did something to my chest every single time. This is everything I've worked for. I looked at that letter a long moment, then I looked at her. You built this yourself, I told her. I am so proud of you. She hugged me hard enough to lift my feet an inch off the gravel and said, "I couldn't have done any of it without you. Not without you both. Not without Dad and you. Just without you." I stood there after she drove off, hand resting on the Airstream's cool metal skin, and I felt something I don't let myself feel very often, which is pure, uncomplicated pride. I thought, clear as a bell, that's it. That's the proof it was all worth it. I thought I had a daughter, not by blood, by choice, by 15 years of showing up. Turns out choice has an expiration date the second it stops being convenient. But I didn't know that yet. I wouldn't know it for another 3 years, not until I was sitting at my own kitchen table on an ordinary Sunday, staring at a laptop screen that wasn't supposed to still be open. It started with a diagnosis, the way these things usually do. Stage 3 kidney disease, discovered almost by accident during a routine physical. Because I'd been so tired for months, I chalked it up to being 62 and running a bakery. My doctor, a calm, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Okafor, sat me down and told me straight. My kidneys were failing faster than she'd like, and I needed to get on the transplant evaluation list immediately, because dialysis alone was not going to be a long-term solution given my other health factors. A living donor, she said, would change everything. A living donor could mean I skip years on a waiting list. A living donor could mean the difference between a full recovery and a slow decline. Walt held my hand in that office so tight it left a mark. "Whatever it takes, Carol," he said. "We will figure this out." I believed him completely. The transplant center in Boston ran the numbers on me 2 weeks later. A specialist there, Dr. Whitfield, walked us through it plainly. Testing all 3 girls for compatibility would take about 10 days. If even one of them was a match, and the odds with 3 biological relatives were good, we could move forward on an accelerated timeline, instead of me waiting years on the deceased donor list while my kidney function kept dropping. 10 days. Walt squeezed my hand again in that sterile little consultation room and said the words I needed to hear. "The girls will get tested first thing Monday. Every single one of them." I believed him. I believed all of it. The testing happened. Renee went first, then Danielle, then Ashley, blood draws and tissue typing sent off to the lab. We were told results would take about a week. That week was the longest of my life, worse in some ways than the diagnosis itself, because now there was hope attached to the waiting, and hope is so much heavier to carry than dread. I tried to keep the bakery running on autopilot. Walt tried to act normal. The girls came around for Sunday dinner like they always did, and I remember thinking how strange it was, all of us sitting there passing the mashed potatoes, knowing that somewhere in a lab, a piece of paper was deciding how much longer I had. The results came back on a Thursday. Danielle was a match. "A good one," Dr. Whitfield said. "Genuinely optimistic. The best odds of the 3. I cried when Walt told me. Real tears, the first I'd let myself have since the diagnosis. Danielle came by that Thursday evening and she hugged me and she said, "Of course, Mom, of course I'll do it," and I believed every word of that too, the same way I'd believed every promise anyone had made me in 15 years. The surgery was scheduled for 5 weeks out, enough time for pre-op workups on both of us. And that's when I need to tell you about the laptop, because that's where this story actually begins. It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks before the scheduled surgery. I'd had a rough morning, some fluid retention, some fatigue that had me lying down more than I wanted to. Walt had taken my laptop into the kitchen to look up something about post-transplant dietary restrictions for me, since my eyes had been bothering me lately with the screen glare. He got a phone call from the shop, some emergency with a customer's brakes, and he stepped out onto the back porch to take it, leaving the laptop open on the kitchen table. I came downstairs slow, moving carefully the way I'd learned to move in the last 2 months, heading for a glass of water, and I noticed the family group chat was open on the screen. Not something I usually looked at. Walt normally handled that thread since the girls had set it up years back and somehow he'd ended up the one everyone actually replied to. I wasn't going to read it. I want you to understand that. I was reaching past the laptop for the cabinet where we keep the glasses, and my eye caught Danielle's name at the top of a message, and then I caught the word surgery, and my hand just stopped moving on its own, the way your body does sometimes before your mind has caught up to a decision. Renee had written, "Has anyone actually sat down and told Danielle what recovery from a nephrectomy really looks like?" 6 weeks minimum. Off work. She's got a mortgage now. This is not a small ask. I stood there, glass still in my hand, not breathing right. Danielle's reply came in under it. I know. I've been thinking about it every night. I love Carol, I do, but I'm 30 years old. I just bought a house. I cannot afford 6 weeks unpaid. And what if something goes wrong on my end too? What if I end up with problems of my own down the road, and then there's two of us who need care instead of one? My fingers went cold around that glass. I set it down slow, soundless, the way you set something down when you're afraid the floor itself might notice you. Ashley's message came next, that same lazy, unbothered rhythm she'd always had, even in text. Not to be harsh, but Carol's 62. Even with a new kidney, statistically how many more good years are we talking about here? Danielle's 30. I love Carol too, but I don't think it's crazy to ask if this is actually the right math. I read that sentence 3 times. The right math. 15 years, and I had become a math problem being solved at my own kitchen table by people who called me Mom. Renee again, and I could picture her exact tone, the same brisk, organizing tone she used when she was running a kitchen. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying Danielle shouldn't feel obligated just because she happened to match. Dad built his whole business from nothing. Carol built the bakery from nothing. Neither of them would want Danielle wrecking her own health and finances over guilt. We need to be honest with each other, even if it's uncomfortable. Danielle, honestly, if the deceased donor list wasn't so backed up, I'd feel less guilty saying this, but I don't think I can do it. Not because I don't love her, because I have my own life to protect too. I stood in that kitchen with my hand pressed flat against the counter, and I did not make a sound. I did not call out to Walt, sitting 20 feet away on the porch talking about somebody's brake pads like the whole world hadn't just quietly ended. I read every line. I let myself read every single line, because some old, cold instinct in me understood something important in that moment. If I said something now, they would apologize. They would backpedal, they would soften it, they would explain it away as fear talking, not truth talking. And I would never actually know what they believed when they thought no one was reading over their shoulder. So I kept reading. Ashley, honestly, the carriage house situation makes this awkward too. Like if something happens to Carol, I don't even know what happens to my living situation. Does that go to Dad? Does he sell it? I don't want to be the one bringing that up right now, but it's in my head. There it was. Not, if something happens to Mom, we'll be devastated. If something happens to Carol, what happens to my rent situation? I had become a line item in 3 separate ledgers, and not one of those ledgers had grief in it, only logistics. Renee, let's just tell Dad we need more time before committing to a surgery date. Say we want a second opinion on the donor risks. Buys us a few weeks to figure out what we actually want to do without making it look like we're the bad guys. Danielle. Yeah. Let's frame it as being careful, not backing out. Nobody has to know what we actually said in here. I read that last line twice. Nobody has to know what we actually said in here. Except somebody already did. I heard the porch door start to open, Walt finishing his call. My hand moved fast, faster than I'd moved in weeks, and I closed that laptop, not all the way, just enough, the screen going dark a half second before he walked back in, oblivious, already talking about the customer's brake job, like nothing in the world had shifted underneath us both. Did you get some water, honey? He asked, seeing the empty glass still sitting on the counter. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. I told him I was tired and wanted to lie down, and he walked me upstairs, gentle as always, completely unaware that his wife had just found out exactly where she stood in a family she'd spent 15 years building. I lay in that bed a long while that afternoon, staring at the ceiling fan, and I want you to sit with what I felt, because I did. I sat with it a long time. It wasn't rage, not at first. Rage would have been simple. Rage I could have used. What I felt was something colder and clearer, like watching an X-ray confirm a diagnosis you'd already half suspected but never let yourself say out loud. I didn't say a word to Walt that night, or the next day, or the day after that. I want you to understand something about me, because it matters for what comes next. I don't act from a wounded place. 31 years running a business teaches you that the person who reacts in the heat of the moment is the person who loses everything they were trying to protect. You wait. You watch. You decide once, and you decide clean. 4 days after I read that thread, I called the transplant center myself, spoke directly to Dr. Whitfield's office, and asked a question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since that Sunday. I asked what my odds looked like on the deceased donor list alone, no living donor at all, given my blood type and my current function numbers. The coordinator came back to me 2 days later with information I hadn't expected. Because of a rare blood type match category I fell into, and a new regional allocation policy that had just gone into effect that year, my actual wait time on the list, worst case, was projected at 8 to 14 months. Not the years Walt and I had assumed going in. Manageable, if I was careful, if I stayed strong enough to wait it out on dialysis in the meantime. I made a decision in that phone call that changed everything that came after. I told the coordinator I wanted to formally withdraw the living donor evaluation for all three of my daughters and proceed exclusively on the deceased donor pathway. I told her I'd made the decision independently, for personal reasons, and that I did not want any family member contacted about it or pressured to reconsider. She didn't ask further questions. It wasn't her business why. It was mine. I didn't tell Walt that week either. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in 19 years. I called Gordon Teal. I typed it out slow, sitting in my car, in the bakery parking lot before opening hours, hands steadier than I expected. Me, Gordon. Is 68 still on the table for the Airstream? His reply came back in under 10 minutes. That man practically sleeps with his phone in his hand. Gordon. For you, Carol, always. What's going on? Me. Need it gone by Friday. Cashier's check. I'll explain someday. Gordon. Say less. I'll bring the trailer down myself. 12 years of my life, in that little aluminum shell. Rewired wiring, hand-cut upholstery. 4 attempts to get that cream color exactly right. And I let it go over a text exchange that took less time than a loaf of bread needs to rise, because somewhere between that laptop screen and that phone call, I had stopped being a sentimental woman and become a practical one. Practical women don't wait around hoping to be chosen. They fund their own lives and let the chips fall. Gordon showed up that Friday with his trailer, a big, gentle man with a gray beard who'd known me almost 2 decades. He took one look at me, saw something in my face I hadn't managed to hide, and asked quiet, just between the two of us, "You sure about this, Carol?" I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life. He didn't push it further, just winched that Airstream up onto his ramp slow and careful, like he was handling something with a pulse. And before he pulled out of my driveway, he pressed a cashier's check into my hand for $71,000, $3,000 over his usual offer, which I never asked for and will never forget. "Keep her safe for you if you ever change your mind," he said. I told him I wouldn't, but it was a kind thing to offer. I used that money to open a private pay expedited evaluation slot at a second transplant center in Boston that Dr. Whitfield had mentioned almost in passing, one that could get me further along on parallel testing and shave real time off my wait, since I now had capital nobody else in this family knew existed. I opened a separate account at a bank across the state line and moved my income there quietly, same as I'd been running the bakery's books for 31 years, careful, organized, mine. I told Walt the joint account looked thin because of medical costs. He believed me the same easy way I'd believed him about the girls getting tested first thing Monday. Funny how a lie sounds so different depending on which side of it you're standing. 5 months passed. I want to give you a few small moments from those months, because they matter more than the big ones ever do. Big betrayals are easy to spot from a mile off. It's the small ones underneath them that tell you the truth of a house. One evening, still weak, still tethered some days to a home dialysis machine humming in the spare room, I asked Renee to help me measure out my fluid restriction for the evening. A simple thing, needed a second set of hands. She was on her phone, thumb scrolling, texting Ashley something about a restaurant reservation. "In a minute, Mom," she said, and finished her message before she ever got up. A few days after that, Danielle stopped by, walked past me on the couch straight to the hall closet, grabbed a box of my good stationery without asking, said she needed it for thank you cards from a work event, and left without once asking how the dialysis numbers had been trending that week. Then the phone call. I was resting in the den, door half open, and I heard Danielle on the phone with a coworker, voice bright with something close to relief. She's stable for now, she said. Honestly, I think the whole donor thing kind of resolved itself, thank God, because I really wasn't ready for that. She meant it about her own life. I heard it as something else entirely. I heard we almost had to actually sacrifice something for her. I sat in that den with my hands folded in my lap and ran the same cold math on my own family that they had run on me at that kitchen table. Every day made it clearer. I wasn't a woman these girls loved unconditionally. I was a complication they were quietly grateful had resolved itself without costing them anything. That isn't family. That's liability management with better manners. And I was done being managed. 7 months after that laptop screen went dark under my hand, I got the call from the transplant coordinator on a Tuesday morning. A donor match, deceased donor, excellent compatibility, surgery scheduled for 11 days out. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where 3 daughters had once quietly agreed not to sacrifice anything for me, and I felt something settle in my chest that had nothing to do with my failing kidneys. The surgery went about as well as these things go. 6 hours, clean recovery, doctor. Whitfield told Walt afterward that my numbers looked better than they'd hoped going in. I don't need to walk you through the hospital days, the tubes, the monitors. That isn't the story. The story is what happened after I came home, because I came home changed, not broken, clarified. 2 months into recovery, strong enough to be back on my feet most of the day, I asked Walt to arrange a family dinner, told him I wanted to celebrate properly with all 3 girls, once I was strong enough to enjoy it. He lit up at the idea, practically giddy, said it was about time we all celebrated together as a family. A family celebration for the woman whose daughters had quietly decided wasn't worth the sacrifice. I told him it sounded perfect. If you've been with me a while, you know exactly what kind of dinner this turned into. Drop a comment letting me know if you've ever sat across a table from someone and already known everything they were about to say. Hit that like button while you're at it. The night came. Renee arrived first, already talking about a new position she was up for, mentioned almost casually that she might need a small loan from us to cover moving costs if it came through. Danielle came 10 minutes later, didn't ask a single question about my recovery, launched instead into a story about a new car she was eyeing, hinted Walt might want to help with the down payment since he'd helped Renee with school. Ashley strolled in last, didn't glance at me twice, sat down and immediately mentioned the carriage house needed a new water heater and she assumed I'd handle it since it was my property. I let them all get settled. Let the plates get passed. A nice roast Walt had done on the smoker out back, potatoes, green beans from my own garden. Ashley didn't even wait for everyone to be served before she brought it up again. Seriously though, about that water heater, it's been lukewarm for a week. Probably $800 to replace. You should really get on that. I set my fork down slow and looked at her. Is that right? I said, quiet. Yeah, she said, oblivious, reaching for the potatoes. I've basically been managing that whole place myself this year. Managing the place. $800. From the daughter who, 5 months before this exact meal, had asked in a group chat what would happen to her living situation if something happened to me, and never once framed it as anything other than logistics. I reached into my sweater pocket, where I'd been carrying a folded manila envelope all evening. Renee stopped mid-sentence about her potential promotion. Danielle's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Walt's smile started to falter. Some old instinct in him finally recognizing the shape of what was coming even though he had no idea what was actually in that envelope. I set it down on the table between the roast and the green beans and looked at my 3 daughters, the girls I'd raised since they were 7, 10, and 12 years old, and I said the only thing that felt true anymore. Before we get to the water heater, Ashley, let's talk about a few things I've been sitting on for 7 months. I opened that envelope slow. No shaking in my hands that wasn't already there from the surgery itself. Just a woman laying documents on a table she'd been dealt years ago and had only now decided to play. Girls, I said, you were all very concerned last winter about what it would really cost you to help save my life. You did the math out loud, and I heard every word of it, because Dad left the laptop open on this very table on a Sunday afternoon and I read the whole conversation before he ever walked back in from the porch. The room went silent in a way I have never heard a room go silent before. Renee's face went white as the tablecloth. I pulled the first document out and laid it beside the roast. The bill of sale for the Airstream, dated 4 days after that group chat, signed over to Gordon Teal. Danielle stared at it like it was written in a language she'd never learned. Wait, you sold the trailer? You love that thing. I did, I said. But it turned out to be a fair trade. My life for an old aluminum trailer seemed like a good deal to me. Nobody answered that. Ashley's fork was still hanging somewhere over her plate, forgotten. Walt's hands had gone completely still on the table. I turned to Renee next. Since apparently I was such an uncertain investment, I said, I withdrew the family from the living donor evaluation entirely and funded an expedited private evaluation at a second transplant center instead, using the money from that trailer. I got matched with a deceased donor 7 months after that dinner conversation you three had without me, and I never once asked any of you to reconsider anything, because I'd already decided I didn't want an organ given to me out of guilt instead of love. You could have died waiting, Renee said, voice cracking. And for 1 second I saw the 12-year-old girl again, the one who used to sit on the bakery counter doing homework while I closed up at night. I could have, I agreed. I decided that was still a better risk than living the rest of my life knowing you'd all done that math with a straight face. I pulled the second document. Danielle, since you mentioned wanting to protect your own health and your mortgage, I figured I should stop putting mine at risk for people who wouldn't do the same for me. I let that sit half a second. I've removed you as beneficiary on the small life insurance policy I've carried since you were 16. $22,000. Gone to a scholarship fund for nursing students at your old program instead, effective the week after that phone call I overheard you having with your coworker. Danielle's face crumpled, but I kept my voice level, because I'd promised myself I would. I turned to Ashley last. And you, about that water heater. Effective today, I've transferred management of the carriage house to a rental agency in Concord. Since you've never signed an actual lease, they'll be issuing you a standard 60-day notice. If you want to stay past that, you'll sign their market rate agreement at $1,500 a month. Otherwise, the 60 days start tomorrow. Ashley's mouth opened and nothing came out for a moment. You're evicting me over a water heater? No, I said. I'm ending an arrangement over years of watching you treat a gift like an entitlement, and over a message where your first thought about my death was your rent. I want you to understand I never raised my voice through any of this. Not once. 31 years running a bakery through 2 recessions teaches you that the loudest person in a room usually loses whatever argument they're having. Renee found her voice first, chair scraping back hard. This is insane, Mom. You can't just blow up this whole family over a conversation we didn't even know you heard. I heard every word, Renee, I said, quiet, even. I heard you calculate my odds, like a bad investment. I heard your sister call my life a math problem. And I heard every single one of you agree that nobody needed to know what you'd actually said. Walt finally spoke, hands shaking against the table edge. Carol, honey, they panicked. They're young, they were scared. I should have talked to them better before. Don't, I said, and something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. Don't dress up what I read as fear. You left that laptop open, Walt. Maybe you didn't mean to. But I read what these girls actually believe when they think nobody's listening, and it wasn't fear talking. It was arithmetic. Ashley slammed her palm flat on the table, rattling the green beans. You're not even our real mom biologically, she said, voice high and desperate now. You don't get to punish us like this. There it was. 15 years, boiled down to one sentence, arriving right when it would hurt the most. I raised you from the time you were 7 years old, I said, steady. I paid for culinary school. I put my name on a car loan. I gave you a home at a fifth of market rent because I thought you were finding your footing, not exploiting my patience. I gave you my money, my name, and 15 years of my life because I thought you were my daughters. I let the silence stretch a beat longer than comfortable. But you taught me some honest math over that laptop, Ashley. My investment in this family ended the day I read what all 3 of you actually believed I was worth. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of the roast going cold on 4 untouched plates. I stood up, carried my own plate to the kitchen, same as I would any other Sunday. Behind me, I heard the panic finally set in properly. Mom, please, Dad, say something. We didn't mean it like that. We were scared. We love you. Please don't do this. Love. That word arriving only now, only after the documents were already on the table, the same way it always seems to arrive a little too late in houses like the one I used to think I lived in. Walt found me in the kitchen doorway. Carol, please, he said, we can fix this as a family. I looked at him a long moment. You left that laptop open, Walt, I said. And some part of me thinks some part of you already suspected what was on it and needed to know without ever having to ask. I'm not blaming you for their words, but I am done pretending I didn't read them. The girls left within the hour, quieter than I expected, none of the shouting you might picture. Renee hugged herself in the driveway before she got in her car, like she was cold in 70-degree weather. Danielle sat in her driver's seat a long time before she finally pulled out. Ashley didn't look back at all. Walt and I still live in this house. We eat most dinners in something close to silence now. He does the dishes. I still bake because that part of me never belonged to any of this. Some mornings I catch him looking at me like he's trying to find the version of us from before that laptop was ever left open. Some mornings I let him look a beat too long before I get up and start the ovens. I haven't decided yet what's left of a marriage after this. Maybe there's something. Maybe there isn't. That's a conversation for a different day, and I am in absolutely no hurry to have it. The spot behind the garage is empty now. No little aluminum shell catching the morning light. No 12 years of quiet Sunday mornings with a wrench in my hand. Some nights I still walk out there anyway, stand in the empty gravel where it used to sit. I don't regret selling it. Not for 1 second. But I won't pretend the quiet back there doesn't sit heavy in me some evenings. They say forgiveness is supposed to be the mark of a strong woman. I've heard it in every church potluck conversation, seen it cross-stitched onto more pillows than I can count. But I learned something different sitting in that hospital bed in Boston, tubes in my arm, a machine tracking the exact thing my own body used to manage on its own. I learned that forgiving too quickly just teaches people the price of hurting you is nothing at all. I didn't leave my family that night at the dinner table. They left me first, through a laptop screen on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, while I stood at my own kitchen counter reaching for a glass of water. I only just now finally caught up to where they'd already gone. You should have just closed the group chat, girls. That's all it would have taken. I never got the chance to unhear it, but I got everything else back. And it turns out that was worth more than any organ, or any trailer, or any amount of money ever could be. If this one hit you the way I think it did, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'll see you in the next one.